On the southern outskirts of Seoul, United Nations troops pull back across the Han River. The South Korean government has already moved to Busan. The carefully planned withdrawal from Seoul is orderly and without unnecessary haste, as British and American units fight delaying rearguard actions within the burning city to delay the oncoming Reds, who during the last few days have been attacking with fanatic disregard for their own high losses. A section of a pontoon bridge is dismantled after the main body of troops have crossed in that area. Whatever is usable and readily transportable, the troops take with them. There will be other rivers and streams to cross. Demolition charges are prepared to blow up the portions of the bridge that are impractical to salvage. Explosives attached, the order is given to destroy the floating span.
United Nations forces inflict heavy casualties on communist invaders in Korea in an effort to stabilize defense lines. All supplies, shelter, and any strong point that would aid the enemy are destroyed as the troops transfer to new positions under a curtain of smoke, haze, and overcast skies. These Department of Defense pictures show the orderly withdrawal of the UN troops as they move along, unhampered by the enemy, who has learned to respect their fighting power. Ultra-modern hospital ships stand by to evacuate the men who fought so bravely near Seoul and Wonju. The effort to contain the overwhelming communist bandits below the 38th parallel resulted in many casualties. It's a grim satisfaction to these heroes to know the enemy suffered far more heavily. President Truman presents the first Medals of Honor awarded Korean War heroes. Mrs. Turner, mother of Sergeant Turner, who died of 50 bullet wounds. Edward Brown, father of Melvin Brown, last seen beating off communists with a shovel. Mrs. Dean, wife of the general who disappeared in action at Daejeon. Mrs. Henry, wife of the lieutenant who fought a one-man war. And Mrs. Watkins, whose son was killed in action, accept the awards.
I've presented more Congressional Medals of Honor than all the rest of the presidents put together. But that is because of the fact that these terrible times we've been going through merited those medals. These honors which we've conferred this morning are all that the country can give in appreciation of the heroes who lost their lives in defense of our liberties. It's a privilege on my part to be able to do this small thing for the benefit of those who survived, these men who paid the supreme sacrifice.
Incheon, the seaport for Seoul, is evacuated. After the fall of the South Korean capital on 4 January, Incheon once again sees her beaches crowded with soldiers. It is a scene which is reminiscent of the United Nations landing here last September. But this time the situation is more grim. Incheon has been isolated by the Chinese advance through the abandoned city of Seoul, and the communist reoccupation of Incheon is expected within a few hours. Chief difficulty in carrying out the embarkation here is the unusually high tides, which have a 30-foot rise and fall, limiting the place and time at which landing craft can safely come in. When UN troops, spearheaded by the 1st U.S. Marines, landed here on 15 September, the approaching end of the Korean War was hailed. But then the Chinese intervened to bring about what General MacArthur described as a totally new war. The final outcome of this new phase in Korea is still in doubt as UN soldiers retrace hard-won steps along the roads and sea lanes to Busan. Throughout the evacuation, the United States heavy cruiser Rochester stands by in case the Chinese should appear before they are expected. The evacuation is to be completed by midnight. As the landing craft pull away, the island of Wolney stands in the background, patched with snow. When the Marines had made their landing last September, Wolney Island was the beachhead for the first wave of the salt boats. Now Wolney is the last coastal landmark the troops see as they make their reluctant departure. Thousands of civilian refugees from the same area jammed the railroad station at Incheon, patiently waiting their turn for any kind of transportation which offers a chance for escape from the oncoming Red Terror. The civilians from this section of Korea, that has been in UN hands for a number of months, appear better clothed and fed than the refugees evacuated from Hungnam in the east. The patient and enduring populace prayerfully waits for a chance to ride on something, anything that moves. Compared to walking day and night over the icy ground, a freight car is luxury travel. The harbor area is equally crowded with fleeing civilians. These refugees are the families of the factory workers or the families of dock workers. Many refugees arrange for their own transportation. Fishing boats and freighters are pressed into service. The fare is 10,000 won, or about $30, for the 36-hour sea journey to Busan. Darkness comes. At first, there are only a few fires visible. Then, Incheon is destroyed in the face of the advancing enemy. Dawn breaks over the suburban town of Ascom. Debris burns in the deserted streets. This is the site of a former arsenal. Abandoned locomotives have received a final going over from the air. Kimpo Airfield, 12 miles inland, lies in smoking ruin. Typical of Incheon's total devastation are the locks which once protected its tidal basin. To the troops of Communist China are left these remains of a Korean city.